So you may have think we've crossed the line into the political, but we have not. The soul of America, as I've come to understand, and I spent a lot of time on my sabbatical, 7 short weeks, it feels like, trying to understand the balance between the spiritual and that which is justice, the balance between religion and politics. I was ordained Lutheran, and we have this very rigid understanding of the separation of church and state. And as I look at Jesus, I see Jesus as a spiritual figure, but also in many ways a political figure, because it is difficult to separate religion and politics. So here's my deepest awareness after my 7-week journey. Save the earth, it's the only planet with coffee. My deepest awareness, and if you, and it was at one of my new favorite coffee shops, strangely enough, in Biloxi, Mississippi. Who knew? And if you zoom to the very left center, it's the other sabbatical awareness. Instant human, just add coffee. And Gordon and Brendan, actually, who are in Kitty Hawk today, gave me a portable plug-in coffee pot that I left at home today, that actually I got to make coffee on the road with my cigarette lighter, which was absolutely fantastic. So I think my veins are completely brown right now. But I want to move into the sacred work today. And I chose that particular passage from Matthew 16:26 for the next 3 weeks to be the foundation, be the basis. And these are Jesus' words. And Jesus says, "And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul?" Ask yourself this question and be honest. Is anything worth more than your soul? Even though we had that discussion about soul, and it's a bit murky. I did some heavy soul searching for those 7 weeks, not just about justice and not just about spirituality and not just about religion and politics, but about this work of justice that I've been at for 20 years, running different social service agencies, aid service organizations, homeless runaway organizations, LGBT equity and equality organizations for marriage equality. And I wondered, why? Some would say we're losing the battle for equity and equality. Was all of that work for nothing except for pay? Has it been worth my very soul these last 11 years being back in pastoral ministry, losing myself and giving myself and attempting sometimes to shepherd people, and I place no blame? I'm one of them, who sometimes don't want to be servants but would rather just sit back and be served. Has it been worth giving my life and soul to be a pastor, to be a worker of justice, when in many ways churches around us are dying and clergy, honestly, are no longer trusted? Less than 50% of Americans believe that clergy are trustworthy. In fact, we clergy, Pastor Susan, and the rest of you who are clergy, we are now with the likes of lawyers and politicians. Sad to say from the latest Pew report. Well, to be very honest, my beloved community, I didn't really find the answers to these questions, to my angst, to my constant existential angst, and my spiritual angst, and my justice angst, and my general angst. Don't you love that word? But I will stick to the words of one of my favorite British Hollywood prophets, Minnie Driver, who said, "I wouldn't change a thing about what I've done in the past, because what may have been bad choices have all led me to this moment." And by the way, life's wisdom has told me all we really got is this moment. So I say, buckle up and enjoy the ride. So today, is the soul of America. Next week, the soul of the church, as I explained to the children, and the last week, the soul of you and me. So what is soul? Jesus was a Palestinian Jew, and he would therefore have had a Palestinian Jewish perspective on the definition of the soul, correct? Judaism teaches that the body and the soul are separate, yet indivisible partners in human and divine life. Rather than imprisoning or corrupting the soul, the body that we have is a God-given tool for doing sacred work in the world through the impulses of your soul. Everybody kind of put that together? So Jesus probably believed this, which I got from some Hebrew friends of mine, Rabbi Shmuley to be specific, that the soul is the unique, everlasting, and I think you said that. And what was your first name? Lisa said, everlasting, intangible part of a person. That was probably how Jesus understood soul. So I ask you today, Teresa, you don't have to respond, what is unique about you? What is everlasting about you? Susan and Peggy, what is your intangible parts? My brother in justice, Rabbi Shmuley, said this as I was visiting him as he was prepping for surgery. You may know he gave a spare kidney to a complete stranger who happened to be a New York Jewish playwright. And I said, Shmuley, you are such an amazing soul. And then, of course, in his wisdom, he responds to me, James, the soul is the very bowels of our being, as he's getting a kidney taken out. It's everything we are and everything we do. It is God in you and God in me, James. This kidney is a gift, therefore, from my soul. So I ask you today, as we consider the soul of America, what is the unique, everlasting, intangible part of this country that seems to be in such peril? Would the soul of America give its spare kidney? No. To a stranger, to somebody in need, to a refugee, to a migrant, to a child in a cage? For someone without a job or maybe the means to afford insurance? A soul for a trans person, for an addict, for a young black man wrongly incarcerated? I also chose an Old Testament passage from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 68. I'd like you to read it with me again. No longer will violence be heard in your land, nor ruin or destruction within your borders, but you will call your walls salvation and your gates praise. I so needed to hear that last Sunday, the Sunday before, and for weeks on end when I realized I was becoming numb to the violence until there were at least 3 instances of violence in 24 hours. Bask in the beauty of those words from the prophet Isaiah. Generally read, by the way, during the Christmas season, Advent, as we're preparing for the coming of Jesus to get us all ready for Jesus, who is going to do all this stuff, right? Because he's the Messiah, like some of our political leaders that we assume will be messiahs and bring this into fruition for us. This justice-speaking, brown-skinned Palestinian Jew could bring peace to Israel. That's what they were expecting and they were hoping for. These words of Isaiah, though, speak to us to tell us to see and to notice and to observe God in our midst. In our midst, when things may be at their very worst, to recognize God in the midst. Those of you who are spiritual directors, Teresa, I keep calling you out, and others, and myself, that's what we do. We try to find God in the middle of the fuzzies, but in the middle of the really difficult shards and challenges of life. So if we can notice God in a baby in Bethlehem, the story would go, perhaps we can notice God in each other. So how do we retrain our souls to see God in one another? To see God in definitely both the victim and indeed the shooter. To see God in both, I hate these words, the legal and the illegal. And by the way, a new friend of mine in Maribel is her name, in Mobile, Alabama, let me take a picture of her shirt, which said, "No one is illegal on stolen land." I bought her coffee, and we had some fried green tomatoes. And we talked about our lives, and we talked about why she wore the shirt and why I noticed the shirt. The prophet Isaiah speaks of a new age, and prophet Isaiah says, you know, humanity is on the verge of a quantum leap into awareness. Wouldn't that be amazing? A quantum leap into awareness. The prophet proclaims, but when is it going to happen? Will we ever experience this age of shalom and this age of wholeness? Will there ever be a society filled with love and justice rather than power and profit? No, it's only through the holes in the soul that we break out and God breaks through. But God breaks through, according to Isaiah, as the prophet goes on, through you and through me, through the holes in our souls. According to Isaiah, Isaiah says, and now is the time for Jubilee. It's the cycle of Jubilee when you give forgiveness and salvation and liberation to those who are oppressed, when you bring restoration to the entire community and the entire nation. And Jubilee means everybody is on equal footing, that everybody has equity and justice and equality, and nobody has debts to need to be paid. Now, wouldn't that be amazing if someday somebody came up to you and said, it is Jubilee time and you don't have to finish paying your mortgage. You don't have to pay rent for a year. All your student loans are paid for. All your medical bills are paid for. It's time to give each other a little bit of free freedom and free forgiveness and free justice and free liberation and free restoration. Jubilee means we are all on equal footing. No violence, no destruction, that the walls that we have built in our world are walls of salvation that keep goodness and love in and keep violence out. This is the promise that the Jewish people had for 500 years until the coming of Jesus. That's how long it took. Did Jesus change everything? Oh, Jesus ended up dead on a cross. I guess not. But he started a revolution. And Ellie always says, let's start a love revolution. You see, they clung to these words from Isaiah in the face of oppression by one empire after another empire. It animates their conviction in the face of Roman oppression. Freedom and liberation is the action of you and me as God's people. We can't wait for somebody else, and we can't wait for God to do it, because God has given us the call. So as I traveled from Phoenix to El Paso, Texas, to Biloxi, Mississippi, to Jackson, Mississippi, to Money, Mississippi, remembering Emmett Till, to Greenwood, Mississippi, where I was harassed by a police officer. The story is for a later part of the series. To Mobile, Alabama, which, by the way, is the first New Orleans, really. To Montgomery, Alabama, to the border at Douglas, Arizona. By the way, this border picture, whoops, I think I added some pictures. This border picture here, this is actually just outside in Mexico on the entry into the United States, and that's about a 25-foot long shelter, people waiting to get into America. And to Agua Prieta, to the coffee roasters and the coffee that we sell, to the Hopi Reservation up north. The soul of America, for the most part, is crushed, would you not say? The soul of America is seized by fear. And Ellie and I were meeting at Fair Trade this week, and we both admitted that right now we're kind of more afraid of young white men. Sorry, young white men. The battle for our souls, the battle for the soul of America. I spent a week at our UCC mission and Back Bay mission in Biloxi, Mississippi, where we used to have 3 United Churches of Christ, but now we just have a mission, and I'll explain that, I think, next week. And I noticed a tagline on their sign, which is, "Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly," which is the tattoo on my left arm. Those words from Micah, those powerful words from Micah, and I sat down for a very long, day-long conversation with Alice Graham, who's the executive director of Back Bay Mission. And I said, Alice, because I was asking this question all over the place, what's going on in our country around race and around inclusion and in America? It was a very open-ended question. So she said succinctly, "Brother James, we need to get our soul back as individuals and as a country." She said, "None of this racism, inequity, fear, bigotry, misogyny, big topics, right, are going to end until we understand what it means to be human." And I thought, interesting thought, Alice. She said, "It's all about who is human," and she did air quotes right now. Who gets to make the call? Who is currently making that call about who is human and who deserves equitable human treatment? That's what she said it's about. And this week we heard now that trans people can be fired. Who gets to decide who is human and who has rights? So Alice recommended to me John Meekum's book, The Soul of America, The Battle for Our Better Angels, following our conversation. And she said, "Now, James, this is a really heavy read." I don't know if she thought I was a little bit less intelligent or not so bright. I'm not sure. Maybe I asked her too many questions that I should have known the answer. But here's a quick synopsis of the book. John Meacham says, "Relax, America. We've been here before and we've survived." Hard times, he said, have fallen on America, often during our 242 years as a country, often bringing the worst down of many of us. Racism and hatred have flourished. Fear and panic have prevailed. And he says, politicians elected to lead have instead catered to our worst instincts and separated us by race and gender and religion. And yet, he says, each time we've managed to overcome hatred and divisiveness, inching forward just a bit. I think, my friends, we have been somewhat asleep at the wheel. In all honesty, I would read this book, and I did read this book, front to cover, back to cover, front cover to back cover. In all honesty, I would also add another book as a companion book by one of our Democratic hopefuls, Marianne Williamson, and it is a book entitled Healing the Soul of America. Reclaiming our voices as spiritual citizens. Reading those two together gives you a really clear understanding. How do we heal our soul as individuals and as a country? Will the vigils that we have here and in other places across our country heal our souls? Maybe a little bit. It does for the moment, right? But not completely. It takes connection. It takes connection to the soul that you cannot separate from the body. Thank you, future preacher. It takes connection to each other, soul to soul, to find the presence of the divine in each other and to find the presence in us. And we aren't going to get connected by just coming here for an hour and a half, because sometimes I preach long. I realize that. I have a lot to say, and that's probably one of those days. It's not going to happen with just that hour and a half. We got to be doing it during the week. Like you said, Jody, right? We need to not only exercise our bodies, but we really need to exercise our souls. It's a daily practice. We eat every day. We drink every day. We do other stuff every day that we need to do. We need to connect to God each and every day. On Sunday, we're here to celebrate. We're here to be sent forth to then go into the week and to do the work that each of us needs to do individually. Find those connections. Do some yoga. Pray, read devotional books, read the scriptures so that it penetrates our very souls and, like the rabbi says, the very bowels of our being. We have the unfortunate habit, though, I'm afraid, of waking up every morning and surrendering our souls and our lives to fear. How many of you do that? Siri, Alexa, give me the news. Oh. Radio, TV, laptops, screens, and iPads and iPhones, and caffeine or nicotine get a hold of our nervous systems and hook us into our anxiety-ridden contemporary culture even before we are out the doors and sometimes even out from under our covers. Counter that fear, my friends. Counter that anxiety with calling out to the divine, reconnecting to your soul, reconnecting potentially to the soulmate beside you. The person of soul, and Arnie, I'm looking at you because you're a man of soul. The person of conscience, I'm not looking at anybody for that one yet. Those of us who are deeply committed to radical change in our human civilization, from a dangerous, unsustainable social order to a veritable garden for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren and generations beyond, we must be willing to risk. Like Jesus. We are non-revolutionary people who have a responsibility to be a thorn in the side of a fearful and complacent status quo. We are people of soul and people of conscience in this place. I know you are, and I know I am, and we need to hold a mirror up to the world, and we need to hold that mirror up to ourselves each and every day. Jesus Christ, he was incredibly spiritual, but he had a radical message that touched the lives of politicians and religious leaders and fishermen and homeless people and women of the night and men of the night and all sorts of lepers and people who needed healing. And over the past 2 millennia, my folks and my friends, those teachings of Jesus have been diluted to maintain systems of oppression. Did everybody hear that? Makes me cry. So I say get woke and stay woke. We are lovers of humanity in this place. We are lovers of the divine. We are agents of soul awakenings in a world where there is a collective urge to sleep and to close our eyes to what is happening. So, in closing, and I have no clue how long I've gone on, but I'd like you to pray this prayer. And then Greg is going to lead us in a prayer that's going to be sung. And pray this from your soul. Sing the song from your soul. Like, I don't know where the soul is in our body. When I think of soul, I guess I think of heart. I think of right here in the center, chakras, right? Kind of in the center of our body. So I encourage you to stand as you are able in body or spirit. And if you're sitting, that's fine. But stand and put your hands over your heart, your soul, wherever you assume your soul to be. The rabbi says it's our bowels. I'm not sure we want to be doing that. But take just a silent moment to connect to your soul, to connect to your heartbeat. To connect to spirit. And please read with me this prayer that's on the screen. Dear God, we come together, different perspectives, different politics, different cultures, to ask that you hear our country. We surrender to you the thoughts and attitudes we now hold, and empty our souls that they might be filled with you. Show us to each other as you would have us see each other. Show us the world as you would have us see the world. Guide our listening as you would have us hear each other. Teach us and inspire us and use us on your behalf. Amen. So please remain standing and sink deep into the beauty of the words of these songs. And I'd like to give you a final challenge before we sing. This is a Greek word, meraki. It says to do something with soul. Do something with soul, creativity or love, leaving a piece of yourself into what you are doing. So that is your challenge for the week. Do something with soul, creativity or love, leaving a piece of yourself into what you are doing. Meraki. Amen.